What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven, and today I am here to break down my very first Poké Draft in Pokemon Go. Also, if you are interested on exactly what Poké Draft is, you can find a link to a video explaining that in the video description below. Each week you'll be able to see how I prepare for the week ahead, and then also a leaderboard where I track my progress and see how I'm doing. I will also be doing a look back and kind of final thoughts at the end of the season, and you can follow me as the season progresses here on this channel. For right now though, I'm going to be going over the picks of everybody in the Poké Draft and then also looking at where those Pokemon rank on GamePress.gg's attackers tier list and then Pokemon list in general. Both of those, of course, are excellent resources. You probably know about them already. And speaking of resources, I should mention that the one thing that makes Poké Draft different from a typical fantasy draft or even a draft of something like Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone's Arena, is that in Poké Draft, you do have to make some decisions based on the resources available to you. And so I understand not everybody might be able to make the exact same picks as somebody else in a Poké Draft. Which brings me to my first pick. And in my very first Poké Draft, I actually got the chance to draft the very first Pokemon. So I went with Mewtwo, and like I said, not everyone might have equal access to Mewtwo, but I do, which made it a pretty clear pick one for me in this draft. Really, I could see any of these tier 1 or tier 2 Pokemon getting picked up, but Mewtwo really provides a lot of type coverage with 4 different charge attacks, and his Confusion Shadow Ball moveset also allows him to be a generalist and really get used in a variety of raids. You do also have to be willing to spend some TMs if you draft Mewtwo, but I have a bunch of TMs, so I'm willing to do that as well. Then, as we fill out the first picks, we see Rayquaza, another tier 1 legendary, then Kyogre, Machamp, Tyranitar. We see all the tier 1 Pokemon get drafted first. That's pretty typical. I think that all of the tier 1 and then all of the tier 2 Pokemon, except for the dragons, are really all defendable first picks. Then we see Dragonite get taken, and that's also a great pick because Dragonite is an insane generalist. And there's 2 terms that I'm kind of going to throw around as we go through this Poké Draft. The first is generalist, and that's going to include of the drafted Pokemon Rayquaza, Machamp, Dragonite, and then also kind of Mewtwo. These Pokemon are so strong that they're probably going to get used in every raid, even if they don't have a super effective moveset. Then the next term is specialist, which means the Pokemon might not always get used, but if it has a super effective moveset, it will be one of the top counters for a given raid boss. So that's also going to include Mewtwo. It could probably include Rayquaza, and then definitely Kyogre, Tyranitar, and then of course Raikou, which gets drafted 7th. Raikou, among all of these choices, is the biggest specialist because it only does that one thing, which is electric type moves. However, when it comes to electric type moves, it's the best in the game, bar none. So while a pick like Raikou doesn't give you that much flexibility, it means that if a water flying, like, okay, if Pelipper is a tier 3 raid boss, you probably win the week. A lot of these legendary Pokemon in these first picks wind up being both specialists and generalists. And of course, something like Machamp, I call it a generalist because it really only has one moveset, though that moveset does give it a wide variety of type coverage, which allows it to be super effective in a lot of matchups. So there's a lot of gray areas, especially among these first few picks. Now we get to pick 8 with Ruthven, and he gets to grab 2 Pokemon because he is the wheel, so that's going to loop back around, and you'll see that happen on my picks as well. Ruthven picks up one of the other best generalists in Groudon, and then a specialist in Moltres, which he goes down to tier 3 for. He also had the option to pick up something like Salamence or Hariyama, but went with Moltres instead. Now, as far as the timeline for when we were doing this Poké Draft, we were actually doing it when Shiny Kyogre was the current tier 5 legendary raid boss. Poké Draft basically breaks down into 3 things. The first is what resources do you have available to you. The second is how do you rank Pokemon based off those available resources. And then the third is predicting the future released content. At the time of this draft, a lot of us were thinking, okay, we've got Shiny Kyogre now, we will probably get Shiny Groudon then for 2 weeks, followed by Shiny Rayquaza leading up to GoFest. Obviously, this isn't what happened, but this was what was on our mind. Because of that, we were thinking that during Groudon week, we are probably likely to see grass, ground, or water Pokemon as the Tier 3 raid bosses. And then during Rayquaza, we were probably likely to see Ice-type as the featured Pokemon. Moltres being one of the best counters to Grass and Ice-type Pokemon meant that Fire-type, I think, was really on everyone's radar throughout this draft. So we'll see how that influences the picks to come. Next, Sam takes Salamence, which definitely complements the Specialist Raikou that she has already. Then we see Zapdos get picked up from Tier 4, followed by Gyarados, Entei, Golem, and Latios before it gets back to my second pick. So already a lot of really good Pokemon have been taken, and I actually think for this pick for a while. I strongly consider Hariyama as the last Tier 2 attacker left in the draft. Also really on my mind is Blaziken, which gives me a fighting type and a fire type and just a really good Pokemon. I also am pretty sure I'm gonna go with Gengar here because I have a fully powered up Legacy Gengar, and that is also just going to be a great generalist type coverage that I will probably use in every raid battle. So like I said, my next pick, I'm between Hariyama as the last Tier 2, Blaziken, which isn't really listed on our Tier 4, but it's still a really good Pokemon, and then also Executor as the last Tier 3 available. Now, unfortunately, according to the rules that we are using, Alolan Pokemon are not available to be used in this format. I'm sure we'll be able to use them for future drafts, but for this draft, that was the rule that we decided to stick with. Like I said, I went back and forth on this a lot, but ultimately, it was time to make a decision, so I went with the generalist Executor over the other options. Executor is a great Psychic-type Pokemon, and it is the best Grass Pokemon really in the game. The other thing that took me off of drafting a fighting type is that Mewtwo and Gengar both can learn the charged move Focus Blast. And while they're not necessarily the optimal fighting type Pokemon, they are still fighting type moves that I have at my disposal. Moving on, we see Alakazam get taken, and then we actually see Ho-Oh get taken. Now, Ho-Oh and Lugia were also kind of on my mind just because they have a variety of different moves which can make them good in a lot of different situations. Even though Ho-Oh and Lugia aren't on this list, if either of them made it back to me, I would have taken them probably over anything else. The next few Pokemon that we see get scooped up are Gardevoir, Blaziken, Espeon, and Charizard. Not much to say about these Pokemon, all solid picks. Blaziken isn't listed here, but it's definitely a 4.1 or something, and pretty close to being a Tier 4 Pokemon. Charizard and Venusaur from Ruthven, his first pick here. He's also going to grab Hariyama to wrap up the Tier 2 Pokemon, but those are both really good Community Day options here with their Legacy movesets, Blast Burn, and Frenzy Plant. So at this point, we've actually drafted every Tier 1 through 4 Pokemon on GamePress's Attackers tier list. So I'm going to switch over to our Pokemon list, which you can find at gamepress.gg/Pokemon-list. And from there, you can go down to rating, and you can sort every Pokemon by rating and get a similar lookout. It's not quite the Attackers tier list. There's some different criteria that go into this, and it uses the ratings 0 through 5. One thing that is also interesting to note on this list is that both Groudon and Raikou are ranked as a 5 out of 5, and they really do deserve that rating. It also means that they definitely do deserve to get picked up on the first pick in a Poké Draft. Something like this, seeing Executor alongside Hariyama with the same rank as 4.5, kind of helps to justify my pick there, and then we're going to get and start seeing some options that we haven't otherwise seen on the 4 out of 5 rankings. Here we see Blaziken and Gengar, and we actually have rankings for legacy movesets at the bottom, of which Gengar is actually a 4.5 if you have that Shadow Claw legacy move. But for now, as we examine the 4 out of 5s, we can see Heracross, which is a regional Pokemon. Again, not everybody might have the same access to all of the Pokemon that we're going to talk about. Heracross is really awkward because it is the most meta-relevant regional Pokemon. However, I think everybody in this draft here has access to Heracross. And now, of course, with trading, this draft was done before trading was released, but now with trading, of course, everybody has kind of equal access to it. Well, yeah. They at least have access to it. So yeah, Sam takes Heracross, forgot to fill that in there, and then we see Flareon go as another 4 out of 5 attacker, and all of a sudden, all of these Fire-type Pokemon that I was hoping to pick up are kind of gone. 4 Fire-type Pokemon have gone since my last pick, with Ho-Oh, Blaziken, Flareon, and Charizard, and now that leaves everyone except for myself and Hokey Pokey with a Fire-type Pokemon and the 2 of us without. I didn't really realize this because this was my first draft, but just so you know, if you were on the end in a Poké Draft, especially an 8-person Poké Draft, don't think about any Pokemon that you're considering coming back to you, because it's just not going to happen. They're really all going to get taken. Then, of course, Lugia gets taken, which was probably the next thing on my radar, followed by Scizor, Metagross, Vaporeon, and then it's back to me. And again, you can kind of see where these Pokemon fall on our Pokemon list. They are both 4 out of 5s, with Scizor being a 3 out of 5. And I think at this point, we've actually drafted all of the 4s except for Articuno here. So really, I'm going to be looking at some 3 out of 5s or 3.5 out of 5s. So thinking about this pick, there's kind of 3 types that I want to cover here. I want a water type, I want a ground type, and I want a fighting type Pokemon. Now, whether this is the actual best way to go about this draft is left to be determined, but I kind of want a variety of type coverage, and that's what I'm drafting for. The one thing that is interesting about the Executor pickup is that Jolteon wheeled, and maybe if I realized that Jolteon was going to wheel, then I would have picked Blaziken and then been able to pick up Jolteon here, but that's what happens. From there, I would have had a good fighting type, and I would have picked up Swampert to round out both the ground and water types I was looking for, alongside the Jolteon for this pick. But I already have a grass-type Pokemon. I'm not really looking to grab another one. I mean, I could grab Breloom and Swampert here, and I think that's a pretty defendable pick, but I wind up going a little bit farther down the available Pokemon, and I pick up both Rhydon and Poliwrath. This still gives me the same type coverage that I was looking for, and again, we'll review at the end of this entire draft season to really see if that was right or not, but I'm happy with the choices that I took. One of the other things that pulled me in this direction was my available resources and how I wanted to spend them in Pokemon Go. Now, I have a lot of Stardust saved up. We've had a few bonus Stardust events recently, and I've been maximizing my star pieces and that kind of thing, so I'm not terribly concerned with that, but it is still something you want to keep in mind. But the fact that Rhydon evolves again in Gen 4 into Rhyperior meant that I felt really confident taking one. I have a 100, so I have no problem sinking Stardust into that to max it out, and that was one of the big factors in why I took Rhydon here. It also does have Stone Edge, so there's some rock coverage there, and then Rhydon also has Surf. Poliwrath, I think, has Ice Punch, so there's some other kind of coverage there. The main thing is it covers those 3 types that I want to cover, and in Pokemon that I don't mind putting resources into. The draft could have gone a little bit different, but I am actually pretty surprised that Jolteon did get that far in the draft. Regardless, we'll continue on here, and we'll see a lot of 3.5s get picked up in Sceptile, Houndoom, Breloom, and Swampert. I feel like Ivy Pips is taking like all of these sweet Pokemon that I have my eyes on, but Yeah, they're up for grabs. Anybody can draft them. Next, we see Jolteon Go, and then Victory Bell, which is actually a fantastic pickup by Sam. There's only a few 3.5s and 4s left, mainly Articuno, Jinx, Pinsir. Victory Bell is definitely the correct pick here. She doesn't have any grass-type Pokemon yet. Obviously, she does have a Raikou for water coverage, but this gives her ground coverage as well. And Victory Bell is really just a fantastically underrated Pokemon. There's so many grass and water type Pokemon that the power gap between them really isn't that big. And it actually means that maybe I shouldn't have picked up Poliwrath, because there's still so many water type Pokemon that something like Feraligatr will probably come back around to me. That's not to say I don't want multiple water type Pokemon, as water coverage is really good, but I just think Victory Bell is a great pickup there. Next we see Typhlosion and Shiftry from Ruthven. Now Shiftry's obviously good, a 3 out of 5. Typhlosion, I think I'm going to have to scroll down a little bit to find that one. Yeah, it's a 2.5 out of 5. Okay, so not that bad. Definitely was not on my radar, but I guess there was still one more fire-type Pokemon left in there. I'm not sure I would have taken it over something like Arcanine, but it might have better coverage. Let's see. We can actually click on Typhlosion and go to its individual Pokemon page to see some of its moves. And, okay, looks like it's got Solar Beam, Shadow Claw. I'm not really sure what he's going for there, but have a Typhlosion. Next, we see Mew get picked up by Sam, and if Mew came back around to me, I probably would have had to have taken it at the 6th or 7th pick mark. But Mew is quite the interesting Pokemon. So if we go to check out Mew's moves, we can see it has a plethora of different fast moves and charge moves. And you can pretty much always find a combination that is going to give you 2 super effective moves for any different possible raid boss. The real trouble with Mew is that because he has so many different moves, you wind up spending so many TMs from week to week to change Mew based on whatever the current raid boss is. So Mew is a really, really crazy choice in PokeDraft. It is a good choice, and at some point somebody's got to take it because it's just too good to leave on the table, but it does mean that you've got to prepare yourself to sink maybe 25 charge TMs every week, and that will add up over the course of a 5 to 6 week PokeDraft. I am very curious how Mew is going to turn out, and yeah, that's just going to be very interesting to see how many TMs Sam spends, and I'm going to be talking to some people in some other drafts as well to just see how Mew worked out for them. Obviously, once you put the rare candy into Mew, you've kind of made that investment for yourself, so that's nice, but definitely a little bit scary. So after Mew, we have Arcanine, Pinsir, Sharpedo, Latias, and those kind of round out some of the higher level picks. Pretty much everything but Articuno and Jinx have been taken at this point. Then we see Ursaring from Hokey Pokey, and Ursaring is a normal type Pokemon, which makes it an interesting spot on this list, but it also just has a variety of quick and charge moves that give it a lot of different type coverage. Now, a lot of people were joking with me that I should take Banette. That wasn't really on my radar here. The one thing that is on my radar, though, is Piloswine, and Piloswine is really good. Same thing as Rhydon. It evolves again in Gen 4, so it's a pretty safe investment, and it also is like pretty much on par with both Articuno and Jinx. It falls behind a little bit, but I'm willing to take that hit just so that I don't have to invest into either of those 2 Pokemon. The other choice that I go through, now we're looking at the 2.5 Pokemon, is Scyther. Again, yeah, Feraligatr is available. Could have taken Walrein over Piloswine, though I think Piloswine is the clear winner there, but I go with Scyther as a 2.5 out of 5. It's a solid pick here, even unevolved. Scyther is still pretty good. It is one of the highest DPS flying type Pokemon in the game, and actually outclasses Scizor in that regard. Only falls really behind Rayquaza, I think, though it's a pretty significant drop-off, and then it also gives me bug-type moves. So Scyther and Piloswine for me. Then we're going to see Absol, and Absol, I didn't really consider. Absol is basically a legendary Pokemon. Obviously, if you make it your buddy, you get to gain candy slightly faster. If you put it in a gym, you can gain candies a little bit faster than you would gain them for a legendary Pokemon. But otherwise, other than that research that we got, make a curved excellent throw, really the only way to get Absol candy is by completing raids, which means you have almost the same candy income that you would get from catching legendary Pokemon. So Absol wasn't really on my radar for the same reason Articuno wasn't. I kind of didn't want to invest the rare candy into it. It wasn't as much about the Stardust, it's just about the rare candy. I don't have that much Absol candy. I maybe have like 25 to 40 or something. Then we see Amistar get taken, which actually totally slipped my mind and is a pretty good Pokemon. Even if you don't have the legacy moveset Amistar, it's still really good. It still does have a rock-type charge move, and then it has double water stab, super effective when that is relevant. Then we see Jinx from A-Scales, and unlike myself, I know A-Scales already has a level 40 Jinx maxed out, so even though it is a higher pick, tier-wise than Piloswine, and really Jinx could, or Articuno could get taken over Jinx here, that's the reason that A-Scales decides to pick up Jinx here. He already has one, and like I said, that is a big factor in determining what you take in a Poké Draft. Then we see Donphan get taken from Ivy Pip, similar to Ursaring, good type coverage, but it's a ground type Pokemon, and similar thing to Milotic as well. Then we see Walrein from Sam. I think that's a good pickup. One of the other things to consider, and why I was considering ice type Pokemon, is ice is actually super effective to both ground and grass. And like I said before, those are types that I'm expecting could kind of come into play during this Poké Draft. I had no frickin' idea we were just going to get the Ho-Oh raid bosses, but, well, that's what we wound up getting. I still like picking up some ice Pokemon because, well, we really shouldn't have gotten the Ho-Oh bosses. That was kind of just laziness on Niantic's part, I hate to say it. Still really confused why we got the Ho-Oh raid bosses to go alongside Regice. Then we got Solrock from Ruthven, which at the time Solrock was still in the country, and then also Camerupt, which is a little farther down, I think, even so. Alright, so I used Control F to find it, and Camerupt was actually a 1 out of 5, but it's got some interesting type coverage with both Overheat, Earthquake, and then also Solar Beam. I feel like everything that Ruthven has drafted has Solar Beam at this point, and he revealed later that that was actually part of his draft strategy. This draft is going to be taking place over the summer, so he wanted to make use of clear weather and that clear weather boost as much as possible. Very interesting strategy, and something that I wasn't really considering when I did my Poké Draft, so it is interesting that he went with this strategy right off the bat. Anyways, let's scroll back up here to much more relevant Pokemon. Going deep for that camera up there, Ruthven. We see Ludicolo, which is a 2 out of 5, and something down with TTP. Kev from Game Press has stressed as a really cool pick that you might not consider outside of Poké Draft. Now, one of the reasons Ludicolo is so cool is because it has super effective stab movesets for both double water and double grass. So whether you need a water type Pokemon, it's got your back, or you need a grass type Pokemon, it's also got your back. Now, this is similar to a lot of the Pokemon that I've picked up, namely Executor, Poliwrath, and Scyther, all have double typing and then double stab movesets of both of those types. Piloswine unfortunately does not have a ground type fast move, which actually hurts it a lot. Moving on, we see Kingdra from CW, and Kingdra is another Pokemon that I'm gonna have to look up the movesets. Yeah, this doesn't really impress me. I think Feraligatr is probably a better pickup than Kingdra, but you never know what CW is working with. They might already have a Kingdra powered up or something like that. Then we finally see Articuno get taken by Ivy Pips, followed by Lapras from A-Scales and Magneton from Monty. Magneton is a little out of left field, but remember that also evolves again in Gen 4, and it's a 2 out of 5, so pretty solid Pokemon. Definitely just like wasn't thinking about it, but I think it's definitely a good pickup, all things considered. And if you look at some of the Pokemon that he's already drafted, doesn't have any electric types. Electric are pretty hard to come by. And then doesn't really have any grass Pokemon other than Ho-Oh, so yeah, Magneton's a pretty good pickup there. Next is Aerodactyl, another Pokemon that I really wasn't considering, and honestly, the two Pokemon that I'd targeted for the first time in this draft did wheel back around to me. I think if Absol, Donphan, Milotic, or Ludicolo would have wheeled around to me, I would have taken those as well, but I was super happy to pick up here both Starmie and Cloyster. Now, the other options that I were considering for this pick were actually these two right next to each other here, Aggron and Feraligatr. And of these four Pokemon, I think they're all really solid picks here. Feraligatr is a really good water type, but so is Starmie, and Starmie has some other type coverage. Cloyster is also a water type Pokemon, and that is an ice type as well for those ground and grass type coverages that I mentioned earlier. So I was pretty sure I was going to take Cloyster, which meant that Feraligatr wasn't as important, and I was pretty sure I was going to take Aggron as my second Pokemon here. Again, don't really need Starmie if I have Cloyster acting as a water type. That said, the difference between a Starmie and a Cloyster is pretty big for water type moves, but I was still considering Aggron pretty heavily. What actually swayed me here is that Starmie is a better rock-type Pokemon than Aggron. Now, I have been sitting on a perfect IV Starmie with rock hidden power for over a year now, and I haven't really had the excuse to power it up. It's been sitting at like level 17, but I figure if I'm going to use Starmie, that's probably going to be the one that I power up. And with hidden power plus power gem, it actually has a double rock moveset, which is pretty rare to find in Pokemon Go. Aggron only has a rock charge move, which means as a rock type attacker, Starmie actually out DPS's Aggron. Well, after I realized that, I realized I just have to pick up Starmie over Aggron. Sorry, Aggron, I do think he's a pretty good pickup. I don't think he's going to wheel back around to me. What I actually think is going to wheel back around, though, is Tangela. But Tangela is secretly a 2.5 out of 5 Pokemon, and it's a pretty good Pokemon. It also has a double poison moveset, which is super effective to grass, should you need that. But mainly, I'm also looking for Tangela because, again, it evolves again in Gen 4, meaning any investment into it is probably going to pay out in the future. So let's see, does Tangela make it back to me? We see Banette from Hokey Pokey and Cacturne from Monty the Man, and this Cacturne pick actually scares me a little bit because that's another grass-type Pokemon, so now if somebody else is looking for a grass type, they really only have Vileplume before they pick up Tangela. However, because there was Cacturne and Vileplume also there, I figured my Tangela was probably safe to make it back to me. A-Scales takes Muck, Ivy Pips with Kingler, which is another Pokemon that I actually just totally forgot about and actually potentially better than Feraligatr. Still crazy that Feraligatr has gone this late though, and when it gets around to Ruthven, we do see him pick up Feraligatr alongside Flygon as one of his last picks. Then for the last round, things get a little bit silly as we see a Togetic from Sam, and I'm honestly not too sure what Sam is going to do with Togetic, though I should say Ivy Pips said that he had a really cool 10th pick that he couldn't wait to shock us all with. We all know that Togetic is one of Ivy Pip's favorite Pokemon, so I think that may have been partially why Sam took Togetic, but who knows? It'll be interesting to see how she does with both Togetic and Mew, which both have really kind of interesting investment costs required to them. We see Kabutops from CW, and then we see Ivy Pips, and he takes Deoxys. Now, this totally caught a lot of us off guard, but it was within the rules that I discuss in both my first video and that could be found on our rule list. There was nothing wrong with taking Deoxys, so he took a gamble that we might get Deoxys for GoFest. We'll see if that happens. It probably won't, but it was funny, and it was within the rules, so more power to him. Then we see Ampharos and Granbull get picked up last for A-Scales and Monty, followed by Suicune for Hokey Pokey. I think this was also a throwaway pick for Hokey Pokey, and honestly, Flygon may have been a throwaway pick as well. And Ampharos, I think a lot of these people, they were just kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, which was good for me. I now have the option to pick up either Tangela or Vileplume. So, of course, I go with Tangela there, but Suicune is an interesting Pokemon, and I talk a lot about investments and kind of what people might be expecting to invest into their Pokemon. Since I had first pick, I only got one legendary Pokemon in Mewtwo, and then I also kind of avoided them as the draft went on. I could have taken Articuno over Piloswine and things like that, but I only have one legendary Pokemon that is really going to cost me any rare candy or any resources. I do have a lot of Pokemon that have dual typing where I'm looking to make use of multiple movesets, so I might use some charge TMs along the way, but I only have one Pokemon that requires rare candy, and I already have a Mewtwo powered up to 40, so I don't really have any Pokemon requiring rare candy for me, which I think is going to aid me in this Pokedraft. Moving on to Hokey Pokey, he's got both Rayquaza and Latios, which there's a decent chance that he has one of each of those powered up already, but then he also has Suicune, which is going to cost him rare candy, and means that Suicune probably falls by the wayside. Next, Monty the Man has Kyogre, Ho-Oh, potentially Metagross, and then definitely Latias. With 3 legendaries himself, we'll see how he struggles with rare candy, or if he's able to compete. A-Scales really only has Entei because he took a non-legendary first pick, and because of that, he's probably going to do okay. I also found out later that A-Scales has everything but Sharpedo and Ampharos already powered to 40, or maybe everything else is like really close to 40 already, so that definitely helps him as far as his investment. Ivy Pips did not take a legendary in his first 3 picks, but then took Lugia, Articuno, and Deoxys. Deoxys is definitely going to cost him some rare candy, especially if that gets released as a mythical Pokemon. Articuno, I know Ivy Pips already said he regrets because it's just going to cost so much rare candy, but I think other than Articuno and Deoxys, Ivy Pips already has all of these Pokemon powered up to 40 or close to that, like A-Scales. Lugia in particular, he already has powered up, so that might be something that I personally would have trouble spending rare candy on, but he's already done it, so that kind of aids him there. CW just has Zapdos and then a whole bunch of Evolutions and then Dragonite as a Community Day Pokemon. My Lodic might be the only thing that gives him trouble. These were just heavily featured. So yeah, CW should be doing pretty well there with only one legendary. Sam has Raikou and Mew, so only 2 legends, but Togetic is also really hard to get candy for, and Salamence as well, so Sam might have to watch her rare candy. Ruthven has Groudon and Moltres, and then nothing else, so just 2 legendary Pokemons. I thought that would also be kind of interesting to look at. The huge thing, like I said, there's 3 factors going on in a Pokedraft. The first thing is trying to predict the future, which we all tried to do, but nobody could predict that Niantic was just going to give us a Rock-type Pokemon and Jolteon. The one thing that you can predict, though, and that I didn't really touch on too much, Machamp is for sure going to be a raid boss in a 5 to 6 week format. Even in a 4-week format of Pokedraft, you're pretty likely to hit on Machamp at least once. So picking up Mewtwo and other Pokemon that are super effective against that, like Executor, Starmie, Scyther with its double flying stab moves, all of those are really good options in terms of taking down Machamp. And then there's also Rayquaza there, and Latios, Lugia. There's a bunch of Machamp options. Actually, Hokey's pretty set up with these 3. This gives him Psychic, this gives him Flying, and this also gives him Psychic, so he'll give me a run for my money, I'm sure, when Machamp comes out. So, predicting the future is important. just knowing the tier list of Pokemon in general, as far as Game Press is concerned, that's probably your best, most reliable resource for Pokemon rankings, but just knowing this stuff is all really important. And then, of course, just what resources you have available to you. There's a lot of factors which all keep this really interesting. I think that PokeDraft will also be super interesting if I'm like in one of these spots in the middle, or maybe even just 2nd or 7th pick, which allows you to play off your opponents a little bit more. It allows you to say, okay, well, I need to pick up this because I know that okay, so like Sam took Charizard here, but Ruthven's probably not going to take Charizard, given that he already has Moltres. Now, the fact that Ruthven was favoring Sunny Pokemon so heavily means that he might have, but it means that you're probably safe to leave Charizard. Now, the fact that she wanted Heracross, but what if Sam here took Hariyama? Then Ruthven goes and he takes something like Heracross Venusaur, which then allows her to have Charizard Hariyama and a slightly stronger draft. So there's other things like that to consider, and all of those things kind of leads to PokeDraft being a pretty dynamic new game. And I'm really excited to see how this turns out. Again, you can follow my coverage of PokeDraft in the weeks to come. Every week I'm going to be talking about how I prepare for the week to come, and then looking at the end of the week at how I actually did as far as the leaderboards and things like that go. At the end, I'll do a whole recap and see if I win, but honestly, I'm excited to just have fun, have a use for some of that Stardust that I've been stockpiling for a while, and yeah, I'm excited to play Pokemon Go. So hit that follow button if you are interested to see how this plays out in the future. I'm very excited for all of it. That's pretty much all I got, though. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.